Thank you very much. So Utrecht gives a thumbs up. So now we're officially starting the webinar for today's session. It's a session from the task group e-assessments. I'm very happy that several participants are online and joining our webinar. I heartily welcome Dirk from Suchodelez, which is a colleague of mine from the University of Freiburg. My name is Nicole Wöhrle, and I'm co-chair of this task group e-assessment with Eva Seiler-Schied. And today we have the webinar about bwLehrpool, which is the system or the infrastructure that we use at the University of Freiburg for running our computer pools. So everybody knows the situation that several lecturers have different wishings, what systems they need. One works with Windows, the next works with Linux, one needs PowerPoint for some course, the next one needs MATLAB or some statistics software. So the computer pool has to be very flexible. And then the third mission computer pools are used to is the growing sector of e-assessments. So imagine you have a lecturer who had a session about statistics software, and 1 hour later, the next lecturer is coming and wants to have an e-assessment. So now you have to take charge of how to switch the Linux system with the statistics software in the next hour to the secured e-assessment surrounding. And so that's the system that our colleagues programmed for the University of Freiburg with some other partners from the state of Baden-Württemberg. And I'm very happy that Dirk from Suchodelez will introduce our system to you. It's open source, so it's open for everyone who has the need or wants to use the system. So I'm waiting for your questions. And now, Dirk, please tell us something about your bwLehrpool system.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you who joined in this session. Nicole already gave a little bit of motivation for our talk. So beside students bringing their own laptops and lots of mobile devices, we still feel that PC pools are a relevant resource for teaching in university. So University of Freiburg, for instance, still operates quite a couple of such lecture pools, ranging from 13 up to 30 seats in each single room. Those pools are operated at different faculties and not necessarily under the direct supervision of the computer center, but we kind of provide a mid-layer I will talk about. Another important issue, and that's why we are part of that track in here, are e-assessments. They are gaining momentum, and more lecturers would like to run various forms of assessments with their students. And those assessments do, at least to a certain degree, depending on the type of assessment, create new requirements which are typically not covered by individual faculties. So what we would like to do here is that we want to flexibly reuse our pre-existing infrastructures, so to offer an additional service on top of already existing installations and services. The core idea was to be non-invasive. So especially for faculties who usually operate their own environment, it is just an additional option where they can switch to for the periods of e-assessments they want to introduce. So Nicole already talked a little bit about the typical problem you find as a computer center or operator of a lecture pool. A lecturer is coming up to you and talking about his or her session or course she is planning. And that course doesn't necessarily needs to be matched with the pre-installed environment, but that person has a pretty strong understanding what she or he would like to do. So it could be, for instance, some programming course which was not held in before, and so that some or all components are missing on the machine. On the other hand side, of course, that person would like to use the pre-existing environment, like to be able to offer the students access to their home directories, or if it's necessary to allow to print, for instance, some source code or whatever. And to actually make the course happen, that particular person would like to see some Eclipse GRE, some additional libraries, or access to software repositories added to the system. That is usually tedious in standard installations where special software packages needs to be created. Those software packages even might be in conflict with already pre-existing installations, and other courses might get disturbed or hindered by those additional packages installed to the machine. So what we would like to achieve is much more flexibility for lecturers. Lecturers become much more independent of the operating hours of either pools or the computer centers or persons in charge for the computer pools. Much more options for the students. So imagine that students find a certain environment pre-installed in their own faculty, but would like to use the same software packages at totally different places, like, for instance, in the specifically designed working and learning sections in the university library. And from the perspective of the university and general pool operation, we would like to reduce the time and location constraints. So to look at those different stakeholders you find in Computerpools with their different views on their needs and requirements. So lecturers, especially if they are not regularly teaching at the university, they require maximum flexibility. So they do not want to depend on certain time frames or locations to actually prepare the lecture requiring some software environment. Or they would like to see fast change cycles. So to design a course where more and more software packages are getting added to some environment, or where some bugs or problems get fixed during the course. Typically, they would like to see the individualization of their software packages. Software packages usually come with lots of additional components, or could be configured in a wide range, so to match the actual needs which are taught, for instance, in a certain course. And of course, everything should be up, running and working at the beginning of each course without tedious testing and experimenting. So what we would like to see of lecturers on is that they actually can focus on their core competences, doing their work regarding designing and running their courses. Sysadmins typically have a pretty different view onto everything regarding that they not would like to see too much interrupts on their operations. So it is problematic for them when, for instance, regular adaptations of the software environments are required, because it might endanger, as I said, the setting for other courses, and other lecturers might get hindered to properly run their lectures. Typically, they would like to see long cycles of changes, so announcing that they would like to roll out a certain new, or by then not so new anymore, software package and make it available. But lecturers would like to either work longer with the old version because they liked some features in it, or adapted the slides and presentations to exactly the look and feel of that particular version. And others would like to head along and would like to see the most recent version getting installed. So it's typically difficult to host all this at the same time. Another challenge to be faced is that they would like to keep the hazards to the IT infrastructure low, which means that they typically could be hesitant to allow wider rights assigned to normal users, or to give them the rights to install additional components or mess with the configuration of a certain settings. And of course, they would like to see a flexible provisioning of the resources without additional efforts to be spent on that. And then there is, of course, the administration, which is in charge of the facilities, both typically the IT infrastructure and, of course, all the rooms, which needs to be equipped and properly maintained. And so for them, it's of course optimal if those rooms could be flexibly used and assigned to quite a different range of users and faculties. And there might be some additional benefits if you can actually cooperate more, in the sense that the same infrastructures are used. You will see that maybe fewer hardware needs to be actually provided, same for software licenses. And in the end, especially when it comes to large-scale e-assessments, if it's actually possible to reuse the existing facilities, it would be a big plus, because otherwise it could either take time and larger resources to actually enable that. I would like to talk a little bit more about the project. The project is a statewide cooperation, as Nicole already said. So we have users not only here at Freiburg University in the different faculties, but we see some faculties of the whole university joining in, like in Karlsruhe, Mannheim, or Konstanz. And we have a couple of smaller universities of applied sciences, which are more practically oriented regarding the teaching and learning. And especially for them, it was quite attractive to offer more options to their students and teaching staff. We find partners all around the state, like in Offenburg, Heilbronn, Reutlingen, Stuttgart, Aalen, and some other places. The development of bwLehrpool started in 2014. It was a project supported by the Ministry of Science, Research, and the Arts. And but it could use or reuse previous developments we already did in Freiburg. Through the sponsoring of the ministry, we got 2.5 full-time equivalents assigned to the projects to do both the programming and the interaction with the different users to help them to get the system installed, adapted to their needs, and give the introduction on how to use the various tools coming along with the project. We got two funded projects, two-year project periods. The first one was focusing on the base system, so for the rollout and how to deploy a large number of hardware in different places. And the second one built upon the created base and was focusing on the e-assessment modules to enable the system to be able to host different kind of e-assessments. We will talk a little bit more about later. The technical base of everything is Linux. We use remote boot and auto configuration of the machines, and thus are able to support a broad hardware base. So we cannot actually require from the faculty to use a certain set of machines and hardware, so they are pretty flexible on what is actually supported. It is pretty much every machine which can run some recent Linux environment could be run in such an environment too. What we did and where we got our own modules created because they were not available or not available in the proper form on the market was to support specific requirements regarding both for the system administration, so on to how to configure different pools to the different requirements of the faculty hosting it, and of course for the user interaction. User interaction both for the lecturer side, so for preparing and uploading system environments, and for the user side when logging on to choose the proper environment that they are then led into. A little bit more on the for the technical side. As I said in before, we are opting for a non-invasive environment. Meaning that it's still possible to use some pre-installed environment on the local machine, but additionally by enabling the PXE booting environment to start into a net booted Linux, where then upon that created base, using some hypervisor to run additional environments on each individual machine. That is the abstracted view on to our system. So we see it in several layers. So the base layer typically is the local hardware administrator, which just needs to maintain the local machines so that they are properly booting, having PXE enabled and functioning in a general sense. On the above base operating system layer, we provide the bwLehrpool core, which then enables both the operation of either virtual machines or some EXM environments. That both can be configured by the lecturer, who can add, modify, or remove virtual machine images to the general systems to be available either on all computer pools or just on selected ones. It is even possible to exchange virtual machine images among lecturers on the statewide level. And finally, we find the student who is getting to some of the enabled computer pools, either finds the general bwLehrpool environment to work with individually and choose the environment he or she likes to use to match actual requirements, to fulfill some homework, for instance, or to use that environment as defined by the lecturer in a certain course. Or if the room got booted into the e-exam mode, then to find some machine where she then can interact with and doing some type of exam. To allow or to make the lecturers as independent of the management of the actual hardware and Computerpools, we introduced some software tool which allows them to define and create their own courses, attach them to some periods of validity when a certain environment will be available or not, or define some settings for the assessments. The core of it is some low efforts administration, so that they actually do not need to come back to the either pool hardware operators or the administrators at the computer center to actually develop their own ideas. And finally, it allows them to reuse everything which is already locally available. Everything is handled by some Java tool, which is the so-called bwLehrpool suite, a tool which can run on various platforms and gives the users the kind of interface as it's demonstrated in the screenshots over here. For the e-assessments, we allow certain types of assessments to be run. A kind of traditional assessment many of you will be familiar with is that we create some secured environment, which either could be a minimal Linux with a browser with maybe some restricted settings, or a Windows image with the safe XM browsers executed within a hypervisor on it. Either we run in kiosk mode, so no login enabled. Users directly can use and start into the interaction with the learning management system, for instance. And if defined by the lecturer that the login of the user is automatically done to the PCs, and then later on the authentication of the user himself is against the learning management system. And from that point on, the typical workflow is happening. Some kind of assessment is created within either Elias, like we operated in here, or Moodle, or whatever kind of learning management system is used, and everything is then on as you would expect it. Another type of assessments, which by now got possible, is the dubbed by us VM assessment, which simply means that we use a virtual machine, which typically got used already throughout a course when, for instance, students were in some programming lecture and did their homework, or during the courses the interaction with that environment, using the installed programs and trying out their skills in here. So that virtual machine with the additional software is the package which is available in complete typically for an assessment too, but just with some restrictions added to it. So the idea is that students use exactly the same environment they got to use during the course to run the required tasks in an assessment-like setting. That would allow kind of much more natural types of assessments. So if you did something with our studio, for instance, then of course it makes sense not to run it in just a question and answer like setting, but to use exactly the tool you used in your course to create or to compute on the tasks given for you in that assessment. In the background, different options are available then to save the results of such runs, either to store in some specifically created network shares for each individual users, or just coming back to the learning management system to upload the results in an authenticated form so that the lecturer later on can grab it from that system, or has a combination of questions answered within the LMS plus additional results from the assessment run with the original environment on the machine. We did quite a number of experiments just to give you a little bit of an impression on how to kind of block the access, so that students were hindered to actually oversee what the neighbor was doing. This was not only run in our environment, but tested by the colleagues in Offenburg too, who were part of the project bwLehrpool. Sven will talk about that in much more detail in his lecture, which is scheduled for the 21st of November. A little bit more on the tool side. So the lecturer's perspective is to have different configuration options depending on the requirements for a certain course. Like activating or deactivating the visibility of a certain learning environment, limit it to certain rooms or PC pools, which could be required because of some software restrictions that the number of licenses available is not that huge, so that it actually could be possible to offer a certain environment everywhere. For the assessments, of course, it makes sense to either block or blacklist or whitelist certain IP ranges, so to allow users to access the learning management system, but not the internet, to actually look for some answers during the assessment itself. Same for USB devices, so that if not possible, that no one actually can come up with pre-recorded results or additional material. And as I already introduced, that those specific network shares configurable, which can get added or removed, so that users directly get the option to share material among them during the course. Finally, it's possible to auto-start some individual script if the lecturer would like to do some additional preparations which are not necessarily got done by us or required from the administrator's perspective. From the administrator's side, for the PC pool operation, the administration is totally independent from the hardware viewpoint as from the viewpoint of the net-booted base Linux system. As I said before, the local hardware administrators only needs to maintain their own environment if they wish to still maintain them, and netboot enable the machines by just adding PXE to the boot list so that the machine is asking for some configuration from the network. Everything is scaling quite well on the typically proper and wideband network connections you typically find at a modern campus setting. The software environment, besides the base level software and its configuration, is absolutely up to the lecturer, who can then enable or disable certain features of its environment totally on his or her own. So we removed the time and typical physical dependencies for installations. So no lecturer needs to be here in advance to pre-install some software just shortly before some courses start, and thus could do a completely independent preparation of everything from his or her machine at home. Typically, we provide so-called base images, which have a certain amount of operating system level software and maybe some very standard packages installed to it, and everything else then is getting extended by the lecturer's needs. And a big plus for everyone actually running a lecture is that all booted systems are exactly looking the same as it did within the virtual machine they prepared their image with. And using or preparing those different VM images allows the perfect in parallel operation of totally different installations. For the actual ongoing semester, I think we have a list of at least 35 different learning environments enabled within our systems.
We have a question in the chat. So the question was, for how many computers is your system scalable?
So the system actually is scalable pretty much indefinitely. Of course, there are certain limitations onto the network or onto the service equipment. So at least, for instance, in the computer center, we support more than 60, 70 machines in parallel. I think at least more than 1,000 different machines have booted from our core infrastructure. And we can add a number of so-called proxy systems to speed up operation, maybe in a little bit more remote environments. On a more abstract level, so on the statewide level, we share a certain amount of resources, like a so-called master server, where the system updates for the whole system and the base images are maintained. The actual requirements on that systems are not that significant, and everything else is operated on site. And we have some of our partners easily hundreds of machines running on their campuses. What we got by now, as I already hinted, by the 35 different environments, a wide range of scenarios in production use. So the typical software environment, courses, web programming, databases, but even for IT security or penetration testing, it could be interesting to have specifically prepared images available. And as those images are run in a stateless operation mode, it doesn't hurt even if they are vulnerable to certain attacks and viruses, because nothing is left over on the machine when the users are logging out and the next group of users is logging newly onto that machine. We see some courses for microcontroller, embedded system development, mobile systems development, even CAD systems are available to a certain degree, a little bit limited by the abilities of the hypervisors to deal with 3D rendering within virtual machine settings, and of course the various types of e-exams we already have run on different campuses, either here in Freiburg or at the campuses of the partners. Again, a little bit back to the software components we adapted, modified for the project itself. That is the so-called VM chooser component. Chooser because that is the interface the user can select the image for a particular course or learning environment from. Typical situation is that the user is authenticating against the local infrastructure components. Different authentication systems are implemented, like LDAP or Active Directory, other sites using a more general Suchodelez login. If they do not provide, for instance, home directories, then that is absolutely sufficient for their purposes. Then the software component written by our developers, the VM chooser, is getting started after the login. At that point, the user can select a desired environment to use. At this point, it even would be possible not only filter the available images for the actual room the machine is running in, but it would be even possible to filter it on the semester or the faculty or whatever of the students who actually logged onto here. The VM chooser then is configuring the various hypervisors we can use on that platform. The VMware player and VirtualBox are well established. The Linux QEMU KVM would be available too, but some of the software environment configuration features are still missing. So it's still on our roadmap to finally implement that. Not only the base component is for some interest, but we got asked by our users, mostly the lecturers, that they would like to have a little bit more control over the workplaces of the students, or in some rooms where the setting might be a little bit suboptimal, so that not everyone can easily oversee the presentation on the wall screen, so that it's actually possible to distribute the display of the lecturer's machine to all machines within that room. So the typical thing for that pool video switch is the typical feature set you would expect from some hardware systems. which were in use up to a couple of years ago. That component is totally software-based, so if the hardware features change, the typical problem like not the diminishing availability of PS2 connectors or VGA are not interfering with the update of hardware, as it's completely software-based. It even could be used not only to lock down certain during certain periods during a lecture, so that no students can actually interact with the machine and update his or her social media account. It's even possible. It even would be possible to use it for the monitoring of ongoing assessments to see if some unusual is happening on someone's screen, not only to detect cheating, but to check if something is going wrong with some machine and needs to be interfering with to reassign the students another computer, for instance. But that, of course, is depending on local regulations, so privacy and data protection laws might prevent the application in some places. Yeah. We hoped that we were able to at least give you some overview on what we are doing here and how we are trying to support our lecturers to deal with their everyday needs and demands regarding computerized lectures, courses, and assessments. Thank you very much for your attention. We give some contact information here, so if you have some later on questions which we cannot maybe answer after this session, then you are invited to just drop an email and ask for everything you would like to see answered, or just surf to our project homepage. Most of the content on that page by now got translated into English. We did it to prepare that webinar lectures so that you actually have a chance to follow or to read on certain features and requirements if you would like to do more with such a system.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dirk, for giving this overview over these systems. So now the chat is open if you do have some additional questions or questions afterwards to this presentation. I think the system, the big benefit of the system that I see as I'm in charge of the e-learning systems at the University of Freiburg is that our lecturers now have the possibility to go to every computer pool at the university and say, I have my course today in the university's IT services, and in the next week I have another course, but I need the same software, but the course is taking place at the library, for instance. So lecturers are very flexible in preparing their own IT surroundings they need for their courses, and they can start it in every computer pool which is connected to the system. And it's not depending, oh, I have to talk to the administrator of the university's IT services, and for my other course in the library, I have to talk to another person. So they just prepare their own surroundings, put it on the system, and then they can start it via network wherever they go. And the same is for our e-assessments. So we just need a very lightweighted Linux machine, which can be, the question was during the talk, the question was how many machines can be operated or started at the same times. And it's just depending on how good is the building attached to our network system. And if we have a good network connection, you can start just 100, 200, 300 or more computers at the same time, which is a main problem for preparing e-assessments with a large amount of participants, as you know. So if anybody of the Lehro community is judging with the same problem, so we need a system to have more flexibility over the campus in our different computer pools, do not hesitate to contact Dirk and his colleagues. And while I was talking, there was another question in the chat. So the question is, how do you prepare the teachers to use the system?
So typically we offer courses. We have different groups of teachers which actually use the environment. So there's a specific department within the university which offers job-related qualification courses for students, often with outside lecturers. They actually prepare their lecturers by themselves, by either offering them courses or just supervision if they come to their offices and show them on how to operate such an environment. Further on, our support staff is at least partially prepared to enable lecturers which drop by to show them on how to interact with the system, on how to make changes and adapt it to their needs. And of course, our team is giving general purpose introductory courses on how to use the system on a regular basis. Where pretty much everyone can either drop in or in preparation when some new computer pool got opened at some faculty, so that every relevant administrator, lecturer, or person in charge of those facilities is brought together, and then a joint session is held. Typically, 1 to 2 hours are enough to teach them on how to use such a system, because in the end, it's pretty much on how to use one's own laptop. So you need some base software for virtual machines installed to your private machine, and then download the Java software component for that bwLehrpool suite. And that software tool is pretty much doing the background work for you, like downloading the image you would like to adapt. Then you start that image in the hypervisor, interact with it on a very simplified base, because no complex Active Directory or Linux-like environment authentication required. Install software packages with administrators' rights, then pack everything, shut down the system properly, then upload it, and from that point on, it can be used and be made available for the lecture pools.
Yeah, thank you for that. Is there any other questions? So please use the chat. We still have a few minutes. Dirk will be available for a few more questions. And in the meantime, I can tell you, or I want to invite you for our second webinar. So now today it was the technical part behind the system that we are using for the flexibility of having lecture courses in our computer pools or having e-assessments. We did not hear too much about the e-assessments itself, but Dirk also mentioned or already mentioned the next webinar, and I heartily invite you to join next week on the 21st. We will tell or go deeper into the e-assessment itself, especially the e-assessment which we use our learning management system for, but we use the bwLehrpool system for starting the machines, how we secure the environments that nobody can cheat, no USB sticks and so on. So if you're interested in the concreter or the more concrete part of the e-assessment, I will invite you to join next week. Dirk will also be part of the webinar for some more or background information of the bwLehrpool, and my colleague Sven Slotosh will be talking about the e-assessment system we are using here at university, which is also an open source learning management system. It's not Moodle, but it's Ilias. It's a German-based learning management system. But the system itself, it does not depend if you take Moodle or Ilias or any other learning management system or even any proprietary e-assessment system. So you just need a small Linux virtual machine to start or to connect to your e-assessment system. And that's what we tell you in the next week. So if there are no more questions, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Then for now, for today, I say goodbye and thank you for the listening. And as we said, next week, 21st of November, we will continue with the second part of our experiences with e-assessments at the University of Freiburg. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.